Okay, dreamer, please.
Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So we have a new time chest from Dev Kagura, and this is going to last for 7 days. So the part 1 was already covered, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago. So if you want to, have a refresher of some of the selectors in this particular dual time chest, you can check that out because I won't be repeating those that are similar. So for the part 2, we are actually going to have 5 similar or rather identical selectors that has already happened from the part 1. So I will not be repeating the ideal jewels that you should be picking, so I would really strongly recommend that you check the part 1. And the reason why you will want to check out the part 1 is because I segmented the player base into 3 tiers, which is the new players, returning and progressing players, and veteran players. And the choices that you guys have to make are all different at different stages of your gameplay. So it is very important for you to go check that out. But in this video, we're going to focus on the Myth Revolutionary Jewel, which is a very important jewel for all new, returning, and veteran players, because Revolutionary Jewels are only obtained from the Guild Raid shop and also from some of the Gaia's gifts. So this is not a jewel that you easily come by, and which is why I think it is very important that we go in detail and go in depth about this jewel. As you can see here, there are all the main substats and the myth substats, right? So all are catered towards PvE content, and you might be thinking, where will you use these and who you will use these on? Now I will prioritize your DPSs. So we'll first look at Velika. Velika tends to use the combination of crit lethal damage increase, physical magic attack increase, and awakening gauge increase, awakening gauge charge speed increase. So that is not included as a PvE jewel, it is a Fallout of O jewel. So the 2 main ones which she usually uses are these 2. And for the substats, usually you will go with crit and lethal rate. This is pretty much a given because you do want to buff her crit and lethal rates to a good amount so that you have less reliance on heroes like Yuri, Fenrir, so you can actually slot in different heroes in your teams, and then you can actually increase your damage output, such as using Rin, because Rin does require 4 magic heroes for her passive to activate, right? The crit and lethal damage increase passive to activate. So in that case, it's very difficult for you to use heroes like Fenrir. So you will really want to rely on these myth substats to give you the additional crit and lethal rate, on top of having guild buffs that also buff crit and lethal rate, and your fighter soul as well. So that will help you reduce the reliance on certain core heroes, and you can improvise with your team. Whether which duo has which substat is up to you. Just make sure that they do not have the same substat because they do not stack. Same for Mei actually. Mei also tends to use these 2. She can also use the PvE skill cooldown one, but I think more players are starting to use her with increased awakening gauge because she does, reset her awakening gauge, and that allows her to do a lot more damage in a shorter period of time. But the thing about Mei is that for her passive, she does increase her crit rate by herself up to 100%. So there is really no need for you to have crit substats on her. Rather, you should go with lethal. And I also listed here counter basic attack damage and PvE speed attack damage. The reason is because Mei has a very powerful effect attack. So usually if you go with double speed on Mei, that will pretty much allow her to do more basic attack damage, which is going to be very helpful because her basic attack damage is huge. It's sometimes even more than her skill damage. And I think this is one possible option, and if you use her for Brawl, this is even better for her. Again, it doesn't matter which combination of main stat and myth stat that you use. You can always have, crit and lethal damage with the counter and the physical attack with the lethal, or you can also go the other way around. And of course, I think having the lethal rate with the lethal damage is, looks better for you, right? And definitely, if you were to rotate this jewel onto Velika, it will work very well as well. Now for me, you can also use skill cooldown. For skill cooldown, if you decide to go with skill cooldown, I think these will be the best myth substats for her, whereby you are using lethal rate increase, basic attack damage, and speed attack damage. So that's 3 of her myth PvE jewels settled. Then we have another DPS, and that is Gelidus. Gelidus is mainly used in Heavenly Stairs and sometimes in Guild Dungeon as well. And of course, in the recent dungeon, special dungeon of Chip, we also have Gelidus being one of the better DPSs there as well. So as a DPS, same thing, you have to go with PvE crit and lethal damage, PvE physical attack, And of course, you can also use increase awakening gauge on Gelidus, but the thing is, Gelidus doesn't reset his awaken skill unless you have Seek or Vanessa, or you have the accessory and the initiate set on Gelidus, then he can reset his awaken skill. But otherwise, you can also use skill cooldown on him because he does have a pretty short cooldown on his bottom skill, which does good damage. So these three are probably the better substats for him. You may not want to use basic attack damage, but there's really no other better option. The reason is because you don't want to give him defensive substats such as block rate and all damage decrease, because as a DPS, you really want them to make use of the Berserker Ring effect. I mean, I'm assuming that you are having Berserker Rings on them. You want them to take more damage so that the Berserker Ring effect can take place and they will do more damage output in return. So you don't really want defensive myth sets on them. I hope that makes sense to you, and if you have any questions about this, please leave them in the comments because I think this is fairly important. And then we have the 4th DPS, and that is Reginleif. I think most people kind of forget about her, but she is truly the best DPS in Brawl. So this is really an end game kind of play. If you're not invested in Brawl now, I think this is something you don't have to worry too much about yet. Okay, but for those players that really want to push their Brawl just a little bit more, definitely go for a duo like that. For Reginleif, of course, crit and lethal damage increase, magic attack increase. You can go with the crit and lethal substats for sure, but I think a better option would be going with the basic attack damage and speed attack damage so that she is able to do more. Because as we know, in Brawl, we are mainly relying on basic attacks, right, to hit Leonid. And with a 20-man team, you can be pretty certain and sure that your lethal rate and your crit rate are going to be buffed very well because it's 60 turns anyway, right? So you're gonna have Fenrir, you're gonna have Yuri on the team, and you're gonna have guild buffs. So with all that together, I think you shouldn't have an issue pushing Reginleif's crit and lethal to a very high percentage. So you don't really need the crit and lethal increases on the myth substats, but rather you should go with basic attack damage so that she can hit a lot more. Then we also have to talk about the support line, which is really not a priority, okay? I'm just putting it here because I'm sure some players might be thinking, you know, what if my DPSs are all geared? I mean, that's a really rare situation, but I mean, who knows? So if you really want to have a duo for your frontline support unit like Ares or Yuri, these three, of course, defensive PvE duos are better for them, especially PvE status effect resist, because they will be taking a lot of different status effects, especially if you don't have duplicates of them, right? If you only have one copy of Yuri, you have to almost use her in every single PvE mode, and that is going to be not very efficient. You're going to change your traits continuously, and even if you change your traits continuously, you're only reaching 90% of resistance. So that's why you do need the PvE status effect resist to really push it for you. And of course, with that, you will want defensive in nature substats, myth stats, so that they will take less damage and survive longer to buff your DPS. And counter rates, of course, for counter heroes like Seek or Ares. So moving on, we have the next duo, which is the Myth Fallout of Woe duo. This is also a very important duo to take note because it has very good substats, myth stats, as you can see there, right? And as we know, Fallout of Woe duos, honestly, only the first 4 are pretty good. The last 3 are not so good, and I even labeled 2 as trash. Okay, so I won't be talking about those. So we'll start with the Awaken Gauge Charge Speed, which is obviously the best Fallout of Woe duo, and it can go with any myth stat on the list. So I will break it down for you. Of course, for your DPSs in PvP, you will want lethal rate and crit rate, and this can also be used on your PvE DPS like Velika and Gelidus, like I mentioned. So it is actually very flexible if you do own one combination of this, right? Lethal rate or crit rate. And many PvP units do use Awakening Gauge Charge Speed increased duos. Now, you can also go with the effect attack rate increase or the speed. The reason why you want to go for these two will probably be for your attack leader. Usually an attack leader like Dylan's or Yonhee could use these for their benefit because they do have very good effect attacks and they tend to be the attack leaders of your team. So if you give them speed increase, you don't have to use a speed duo in that case, and you also grant them an additional effect of having increased Awakening Gauge Charge Speed. Personally, I have the increased Awakening Gauge Charge Speed duo with the speed because this is actually good for my Velika as well. This puts her at a higher speed advantage above the entire team, because as we know, if you are using magic units on the team like Rin or Reginleif, they will outspeed Velika. And if they outspeed Velika, Velika will not land the first speed attack, and in that case, Velika will not charge her Awakening Gauge earlier. Okay, and sometimes that can make or break a guild dungeon match. Just an example. So this Awakening Gauge charge speed with speed, I think is also a pretty good option. And then of course we have status effect cast rate plus 10. Now this is better for heroes in PvP because obviously you don't have status effect casting PvE. So this is suitable for heroes like Fi, suitable for Judas, or maybe Dylan's, Skull. All these heroes can really make use of a faster charging Awakening Gauge and status effect cast rate. And finally, we have the all damage, which is also usable on any hero because all damage is really very general, and you can just have a more tankier hero in that sense. The next one is skill use chance, and I think it's limited to these 4 myth stats which you can pair it up with. Again, skill use chance is a PvP jewel, and you should be using it on heroes that you will want for them to have higher skill priority, like Anti and Fi. And who else? Jack maybe, and Rudy maybe, you know, all these heroes. So obviously lethal and crit rate are all good for them, as we know, because they are good damages. Status effect cast rate is good for Fi, and I don't think Anti needs it. Yeah, so it's the pairing of status effect cast rate and skill use chance is actually more limited than the first two. And of course all damage is also pretty good so that they take less damage overall. You can also actually go for speed plus 3, but this is a very rare situation, I would say, because usually for an attack leader, unless that attack leader has very good skills that you also want to utilize, then you will give this something like Fi maybe, because Fi, you know, can be an attack leader but also requires her skills to be used fast. So this is a possible combination, but the use is very limited as well. And the next two is actually damage reflection immunity and cooldown increase immunity. So again, you can pair this up with any of myth stats, but of course, as I mentioned, it really depends on who you're trying to gear. And if you're using the first two as myth substats, the lethal rate and crit rate, then this is definitely more flexible for you because you can actually give this to PvE and PvP units. PvE because sometimes your DPSs like Gelidus and Velika and May, because when they do encounter enemies that either reflect or do increase their cooldown in guild dungeon, or you know, some bosses in future maybe, this is actually good for them while maintaining their lethal rate and crit rate. But then again, do take note that this will not overlap. This will not stack with the ones that you already have in the PvE jewel. And then we also have the effect rate, effect attack rate, and speed with the damage reflection. Okay, usually if you have the effect attack rate and speed, usually these will be for your counter hero or your speed leader, attack leader, right? So usually these two, for heroes like that, you will tend to prioritize their basic attacks, which is why reflect is more important to be paired with these two than cooldown increase, because you know the combination doesn't make sense. If you're giving this jewel to an attack leader or basic attack user, then there's no point. Even if his skill cooldown is increased, it doesn't really matter. So these two myth stats go well with damage reflect immunity. And then of course we have status effect cast rate, as I mentioned. Again, it's very situational. It really depends on which hero you want to have these immunities for, and make sure they also have status casting effects. And again, lastly, all damage. I really don't think this is a priority option that you should be picking, of course. So I'm not going to talk about the last three options because they are really not used at all in the long run. So it will be a huge waste if you are using the selectors on the last three options. Especially the last two. Survive on 1 HP, we have a better Dark Knight one. And for the chance to attack twice, you should be using the accessories for attacking twice. So I've come to the end of this video, and there's really a part 1 and part 2 as I mentioned. So do go check out the part 1 I linked above. Okay, and I hope this video was detailed enough and it gave you an idea and it helped to improve your knowledge about the game as well. And if you did, do give it a like and subscribe to my channel. Big shout out to my channel members ZMD Phoenix, Yamaki and Hibiku for the support. Stay tuned for more videos. Thank you so much and see you!